Top 5 pure builds in Baldur's Gate 3. This video was originally 10, but the runtime became bonkers, so this is part 1. Part 2 will be linked in the description. Everything on this list is busted and broken, so you're probably going to hear those words a lot. Low key, most of the classes / subclasses in the game are actually really good to take to 12, but some do stand out more than others and are just fun to play. Now before you say this video is too long, the homies said they wanted detailed explanations, so that's what you're getting. I'll be very quickly going over a super quick build outline at the end of each entry, but won't be including gear as again, this video is already too long. So make sure to check the description or the channel for videos on the best gear for each class, which are the next set of videos releasing after this. Quick note, this list does not take into account the patch 8 subclasses, but I will be making full guides to each of those once patch 8 fully releases. Battlemaster Fighter. Some would say Champion is a better pure build than Battlemaster, and that could be true in the case you specifically gear up for criticals, but I think most players are going to get much more out of Battlemaster overall. Honestly, Eldritch Knight as a pure build has an argument to take this spot, but we're going to keep it simple and stick with Battlemaster for this entry on our list. It just might be the most perfect class in the game. Cleric is still the best, of course, but the Fighter is just perfect, and the Battlemaster is iconic. First off, the Fighter can wear heavy armor and gains a fighting style. There are several to choose from, all shown on screen, but generally you'll play a strength-based fighter, and so great weapon fighting will usually be the best, rerolling your damage die should you roll a 1 or 2. At first level, the fighter gets Second Wind, a bonus action self-heal that scales with fighter level and resets on short rest. This isn't crazy, but it is useful throughout the game. At second level, the fighter gets Action Surge, and this ability lets you take an extra action during your turn and resets on short rest. This is extremely useful in the beginning of the game before your characters have extra attack, but it just becomes insane once you've leveled up, because it not only gives you an extra action, that extra action, if used for an attack, counts as, a regular action or a regular base attack, meaning once you do unlock extra attack, you can now attack 4 times in one turn, and once the fighter reaches level 11, you'll be able to attack 6 times in one turn. Well, once per short rest. I don't think I need to go into detail how broken that can be. Action Surge can cause you to completely turn the tides of battle, or outright finish a fight in the first turn. It's such a good ability that a lot of builds will dip 2 levels into Fighter just to have it. There's also the fact that Fighter gets Constitution Proficiency if taken as your first level, and that is crucial to have for many builds. At level 3, the build officially begins as you take a Battlemaster for your subclass. This allows you to take maneuvers, which are combat abilities that set the Battlemaster apart from every other class in the game, and they give the build much more versatility and control on the battlefield. The usefulness of some of these maneuvers is not to be understated, as most of them will not only deal extra damage, they also apply conditions to enemies. You get 3 to begin with and 4 dice to use them with each short rest, both increasing at later levels, and by the end of the build, unless you take a certain feat, you'll end up with 7 maneuvers to choose from and 5 dice to use them with. Here is a list of my favorite maneuvers and what I objectively think is the best. First, we'll start with Precision Attack. This almost guarantees you'll land your next attack by rolling a superiority dice and adding it to your attack roll. I probably don't need to go into much detail about why this is extremely good to have, but it's even better for characters that want to exploit Great Weapon Master as much as possible, which you should be using if you're a Battlemaster. There's an argument for dual wield fighters and archers, of course, but you'll generally want to use two-handers, and Precision Attack paired with Great Weapon Master is just a beautiful sight to behold. Besides that, I use Precision Attack to hopefully guarantee one of my other maneuvers will be successful. Trip Attack was my first love in this game. It deals extra damage and it also prones the target, allowing for big follow-up attacks with advantage. There are tons of ways to gain advantage in combat, but this is a very solid and mostly reliable option for not only you but your companions as well. If you can get this off at the start of a round on a high priority enemy, your entire party basically becomes the Dark Urge for that turn. It also pretty much disables them from getting too far if they try to flee once they do get up. Disarming Attack is probably the best maneuver and ability in general you can use against martial-based enemies. This one deals extra damage while disarming the enemy, basically nullifying any non-spellcaster. Make sure to pick up their dropped weapon to ensure they don't rearm. Most of the time they don't, but I do remember it happening to me, or at least I think I do. My mind is full of holes. Disarming a martial enemy that has a likelihood of dealing high damage or has a high health pool is a 1000 IQ play at all times. Menacing attack deals extra damage and frightens the target, which prevents them from moving and causes them to have disadvantage on attack rolls. This pretty much prevents an enemy from fleeing and has a high likelihood of causing them to either miss or deal minimal damage if they do hit. This is really good to keep an enemy pretty much stuck on your tank Battlemaster and whoever else might be frontlining, while also keeping your characters a bit safer. Goading attack has a similar effect to menacing attack, but instead of frightening, it goads the target into attacking you by giving it disadvantage on any other target except for you. This is very useful for when it's crucial that a specific enemy doesn't attack any of your party members and can ensure a smooth battle. This one is not only good for melee range enemies, but especially good for getting an enemy at range to focus on you as the tank. Riposte is the last super good maneuver in my opinion. This is a reaction that procs when an enemy misses a melee attack against you and retaliates, dealing extra damage. This is another chance to deal big damage to an enemy when it's not even your turn, and it really doesn't go beyond that, it's just a good option to have. Distracting Strike is actually pretty good, giving your allies advantage on the target with their next attack, but most of the time Trip Attack will be the better option, and or the party will already have advantage from another source. Usually one of the other maneuvers we've gone over already are going to be better to use in almost all situations than this one, but it can be useful and does have its application. I can see Commander Strike being useful, but I honestly have never used it. With this, you expend both your action and bonus action to direct an ally to use the reaction to make a weapon attack. If you have other heavy hitting martial characters in the party, this could be exploited in various situations, but I generally think it's going to be more beneficial to go for one of the other options at our disposal in pretty much every encounter. I did want to include this one though, because I know there's going to be some people that see this and immediately have an idea to apply it to their party composition. Sweeping attack is a cleave that doesn't deal regular damage. It only deals what your superiority dice rolls, but it can be useful to finish off multiple low HP enemies or if you want to apply conditions. Of course, there's other applications as well, but I don't rely on this very much. I have seen many people recommend it though, so I thought I might mention it. Pushing attack is a bit too situational for my liking, and I usually like to loot everything so I don't throw enemies into voids. But this does do extra damage, and you can essentially one-shot most enemies if given the proper setting. Most of the time, you can just use shove though. It does do that extra damage, and if pushed onto a solid surface, it will deal a decent chunk of damage and you'll still be able to loot the body, so it can be pretty decent. But again, I think it's kind of overkill. The maneuvers I don't particularly find useful are rally, evasive footwork, feigning attack, and maneuvering attack. Being a martial class, you of course get extra attack at level 5, I don't think that needs explaining, but as a fighter, you get an extra feat at level 6, meaning once you go all the way to 12, you'll have a total of 4 feats instead of 3. At 7, you get 2 more maneuvers and 1 superiority die. Level 9 gives all fighters Indomitable, which re-rolls a failed saving throw once per long rest, something extremely useful late game against certain incoming spells. As the Battlemaster, you gain your final 2 maneuvers at level 10, and also improved combat superiority, which simply increases the superiority dice from a 1d8 to a 1d10. Then finally, for all fighters at level 11, you gain improved extra attack, which allows you 2 follow-up attacks after your first. As stated earlier, using Action Surge, this can enable you to attack 6 times in one turn and 7 times if you have Great Weapon Master. This alone can make any of the fighter subclasses worth taking as pure builds. Battlemaster is especially useful to any party composition due to its versatility and control, the capability to dictate how a fight will go, its all-around proficiency in being a tank, and most of all, the exceptional damage it can deal out while doing all of these things. I believe the Battlemaster to be basically a perfect class. The major bullet points of the Battlemaster Fighter are its maneuvers, ability to tank, and extremely high damage output. You gain 4 feats, 3 attacks per turn normally, possibly 4 with Great Weapon Master, and with no outside interference, again, it's possible to attack up to 7 times in one turn, once per short rest, using Action Surge. For a decent build, starting stats could be Strength at 16, Dex at 16, Constitution at 14, Intelligence at 8, Wisdom at 12, and Charisma at 8. Or you could split Wisdom and Charisma 10-10. But usually that +1 on Wisdom saving throws helps out a bit. For the 4 feats to raise Strength to 20, you can either use the Potion of Everlasting Vigor and 1 ability improvement, or just use 2 ability improvements. For the sake of this quick build, we will use 2 feats to gain 20 Strength. Third feat will be Great Weapon Master, or you can get this as your second feat, and the 4th feat can be used for anything you desire. I like Alert, Savage Attacker, Sentinel, or Tavern Brawler. The 6 best maneuvers in no particular order are Precision Attack, Trip Attack, Disarming Attack, Menacing Attack, Goading Attack, and Riposte. For the 7th, take Sweeping Attack or Pushing Attack. Abjuration Wizard. Pretty much any of the wizard subclasses are good to take to 12 just because of high level spells in general, but Evocation and Abjuration are probably objectively the best, with Enchantment and Necromancy tying for a close third, depending on how I'm feeling that day. Low-key, I just said that because Enchantment's my personal favorite, I don't know. Now, because Evocation benefits pretty much amount to big spell, big damage, for this entry, we will discuss the Abjuration School, which in my opinion is the actual best pure build subclass for Wizard. So first off, one of the most unique aspects of the Wizard is them being able to learn almost any spell in the game from scrolls, and there's actually a few special spells that only can be learned from scrolls, those being Bestial Communion, Dethrone, and Artistry of War. All really cool spells that only the Wizard can attain. As an added bonus for the school you choose, you'll pay half gold to learn spells of that school from scrolls. Wizards can also regain spell slots outside of combat with Arcane Recovery. Now before we jump into the Abjuration side of things, let's quickly go over spells for those watching in search of guidance. All spells have some use or utility, so I'm not going to cover all of them, but I will list my favorites for each level. This doesn't mean the ones not listed are spells I don't use. This video would just be way too long if I described every spell and when or why I might use them. That might as well be its own video. Keep in mind that you might want to take some Abjuration spells not listed specifically to buff your Arcane Ward. More on that in a second. But with that, some of the best level 1 spells a wizard can take are Burning Hands, Chromatic Orb, Ice Knife, Magic Missile, Magic Armor, Shield, Sleep, and Tasha's Hideous Laughter. False Life is also particularly useful when paired with the Abjuration Wizard, but we'll talk about why in just a few moments. My favorite level 2 spells are Hold Person, Mirror Image, Misty Step, and Scorching Ray. Shatter's pretty cool too. My favorite level 3 spells are Counterspell, Fear, Fireball, Glyph of Warding, Haste, Hypnotic Pattern, Lightning Bolt, and Slow. My favorite level 4 spells are pretty much all of them. Banishment is an Abjuration spell, which is badass. My favorite level 5 spells are pretty much all of them. Planner Binding is an Abjuration spell, and honestly, I have no idea what being an Abjuration spell even means at this point. And my favorite level 6 spells are, again, pretty much all of them. Very helpful, I know. Level 2 is when you get your subclass as a wizard, and for the Abjuration School, you'll gain the Arcane Ward, some of the best defense in the entire game, and the sole reason for taking this subclass. The Arcane Ward is a shield that can prevent the wizard from taking any damage. It can also prevent the wizard from having to make concentration checks should he take no damage after the Arcane Ward calculation. Let's break this down. The Arcane Ward is a passive shield with a separate health pool, often referred to as charges or intensity. You increase the ward's HP by casting Abjuration spells, except for shield, which increases the intensity of the ward by the same number as the spell's level. The maximum health or intensity of the ward at any given time is equal to twice your wizard level, so by 12, the ward will have a maximum of 24 HP. This doesn't sound like much, but the way it works is what makes it so broken. So first off, because the ward has its own HP pool or intensity, you can also have a pool of temporary HP for a second barrier between your wizard and damage. This is why False Life pairs really well with the Abjuration Wizard. That's cool and all, but unless you get hit by something absolutely devastating, your Arcane Ward will prevent enemies from even touching your temporary HP, let alone your actual health bar. The way damage is calculated, the Arcane Ward blocks the incoming damage up to the amount of its intensity and then only loses one charge, rather than actually taking that damage directly. Essentially, there comes a point where a lot of enemies literally can't do damage to you. With all of that knowledge, it's easy to see why resistances and defensive buffs are the name of the game with this build, like Blade Ward and Warding Bond. Resistances in general pretty much guarantee you're not going to take literally any damage, and Warding Bond in particular is completely broken on this build, especially if you can use Warding Bond with another character that already has Blade Ward, or something similar. Using these, many people have soloed or half soloed honor mode with a monoclass Abjuration Wizard. At level 6, the wizard can use the ward to protect an ally from an attack as a reaction, functioning the same way as it would if it were protecting the wizard. And at level 10, the arcane ward's intensity becomes especially easy to maximize with improved abjuration, which will boost the ward's intensity by your wizard's level on every short rest, allowing for you to use less spells to buff it. There are multi-classing options for the Abjuration Wizard that are particularly good, like Warlock's Armor of Shadows, letting you cast Mage Armor for free as many times as you want to buff the ward, and several others, but I won't go into that too much as this is already, again, a super long video, and we're focusing on pure builds, not multi-classing. If you do want a decent multi-class for this build, I did make an Eldritch Knight Abjuration Wizard multi-class build themed after Sasuke from Naruto. It's only in written form on the Patreon. I just thought I'd give that a little shout out though. Let me know down in the comments if I should make that a video. The Abjuration Wizard's arcane ward is truly a sight to behold, and something I think everybody should mess around with at least once. Monoclass or not, this is easily one of the best builds in the game. The major bullet points of the Abjuration Wizard are it being a wizard so it can learn almost any spell, its versatility as a wizard, and of course, the arcane ward. A decent quick build could see your starting stats with Strength at 8, Dex at 14, Constitution at 16, Intelligence at 16, Wisdom at 12, and Charisma at 8. Take some of the spells I listed earlier and some extra Abjuration spells when leveling. For the first 2 feats, raise your intelligence to 20, and the third feat is up to you, but I like alert the most. Way of the Open Hand Monk. Open Hand Monks have been talked about quite a bit in the build community, and for good reason. This is easily one of the most busted builds in the entire game. This build has extreme damage output, survivability, and decent control on the battlefield. The Open Hand Monk is a pretty straightforward build, similar to the Battlemaster, but is also one of the most powerful, especially when adding gear into the mix. To understand what makes the monk so good, you must first understand the basics. Every weapon the monk is proficient with, except for two-handed weapons, is considered a monk weapon. This includes versatile weapons that are wielded with both hands, just not weapons with the actual two-handed attribute. Due to martial arts dexterous attacks, attacks made with monk weapons or unarmed scale with the monk's dexterity rather than strength unless strength is higher. In many cases, players will opt to go all in on strength with monks and use the Tavern Brawler feat. A really good option is to dump strength completely to stock up on Hill Giant potions while buffing your dex when starting and leveling. This pretty much ensures your character will just be completely busted, though I won't be discussing this option any further, at least for now. All in all, attacks being able to scale with your choice of strength or dex can make for some very interesting and powerful builds. The monk also gets an extra bonus action attack at the very start of the game, being able to use a bonus unarmed strike after making a regular attack. You also have a second option for an extra attack right from level 1 with Flurry of Blows, which uses a bonus action alongside a key point, which is the monk's version of spell slots, but unlike normal spell slots, they recharge on short rest, similar to a warlock's spell slots. Flurry of Blows is equal to 2 unarmed attacks and scales at levels 3 and 9 and with strength or dex, whichever is higher. Being able to make multiple attacks at level 1 already makes the monk round for round one of the strongest classes right from the start of the game. From level 1, the monk also adds their wisdom modifier to their armor class when not wearing armor. This on top of an already unusually high dex gives the monk some extended survivability in combat. At level 2, first the monk gets a bonus 3 meters to movement speed as a passive when not wearing armor or using a shield. Combine this with Wood Elf, Long Strider, and maybe some gear, and you have the most insane mobility attainable in the game outside of flying. The monk also makes use of their bonus action regardless of whether they're attacking with it or not, because here they'll gain a bonus action dash and disengage like a rogue. Both come at the cost of a key point, but also allow the monk to jump during that turn without using a bonus action. They also gain patient defense, which is useful if you think you have a good chance of being hit, as it will give attacks against you disadvantage while giving you advantage against dexterity checks. Level 3 is where you'll gain your subclass, but before that, every monk gains deflect missiles. This uses a reaction and reduces the damage from a ranged attack by 1d10 plus your dexterity modifier plus your monk level. If the damage is reduced to 0, which a lot of times it will be, the monk can use a key point to send the missile back at the attacker in retaliation. This further improves the monk's already spectacular survivability and sometimes gives an extra chance for damage. All of that, and we haven't even selected our subclass yet. It might already be easy to see why the monk is so OP. Okay, following the way of the open hand, the monk now gains 3 more versions of Flurry of Blows, all similar to maneuvers from Battlemaster. These are all still bonus actions and use a key point, but Topple knocks the target prone, Stagger makes the target unable to take reactions, and Push can push the target up to 5 meters away. All 3 are extremely useful, and like the Battlemaster, this gives the open hand monk a decent level of control on the battlefield. At level 5, all monks gain extra attack and can use a reaction to gain resistance to falling damage, and they also gain Stunning Strike, which spends an action and key point to stun a target, preventing them from moving, taking actions, bonus actions, or reactions, and causes them to automatically fail strength and dexterity saving throws. At level 6, their passive movement buff increases from 3 meters to 4.5 meters, and unarmed attacks will now count as magical for the purpose of overcoming an enemy's resistance and immunity to non-magical damage. That's a mouthful. Basically, if an enemy has complete immunity to physical attacks, you'll still be able to hit it. The open hand monk will then gain the ability to use one of 3 toggleable passives with Manifestation of Body, Mind, or Soul, which grants bonus necrotic, psychic, or radiant damage to unarmed attacks equal to 1d4 plus the wisdom modifier, and Wholeness of Body, which regains half of their total key points and applies the Wholeness of Body condition for 3 turns, granting them an extra bonus action and regaining 1 key point every turn. Needless to say, level 6 is a huge buff for the open hand monk. I mean, it's almost like at every level the monk just gets more OP. It's kind of ridiculous. At level 7, all monks gain evasion, causing spells or effects to deal 0 damage on a successful dex saving throw and only half damage on a failed dex saving throw. They also gain Stillness of Mind, which will automatically cast if the monk becomes charmed or frightened, and immediately removes these conditions. At level 9, all monks gain advanced unarmored movement, making it so difficult terrain does not slow them down and allowing them to jump an additional 6 meters while not wearing armor or using a shield. Open hand monks will gain a Key Resonation Punch, Punch as a bonus action version, and Blast. The punches apply a condition to the target called Resonate, which can then be detonated via Blast, which only costs 1 key point, no action or bonus action. This causes an explosion on the target with a 5 meter radius, dealing 3d6 force damage. This is one of the coolest abilities in the game, and just makes the open hand monk that more deadly. By this time in the game, your monk is probably already completely busted, and likely has been for quite some time. At level 10, all monks' unarmored movement increases from 4.5 to 6 meters, and they gain Purity of Body, rendering them immune to poison damage, the poison condition, and all diseases. Level 11 caps off the open hand monk with Tranquility, granting them permanent sanctuary after every long rest up until the point the monk attacks. Like, what the hell, dude? I think with all of that explained at level by level, it's easy to see why the open hand monk is widely regarded as one of the most busted builds in the game, and this is all before you start to add gear into the equation. There are several ways to go about this, but for a quick, decent build, starting stats are Strength at 12, Dex at 16, Constitution at 14, Intelligence at 8, Wisdom at 16, and Charisma at 8. If you want to use Tavern Brawler and exploit Hill Giant potions or gloves, you can respec and dump Strength completely at level 4, set Constitution to 15 to use the extra 1 point from Tavern Tavern Brawler with to get it to 16, and use your 2 ability improvements to get Dex or Wisdom to 20. In this case, I would go with Wisdom. If you just want to stick to a Dex-based monk, use 2 ability improvements for Dex, and the third can be any of your choosing. I'd probably take Alert as usual. For a Tavern Brawler-based build that doesn't exploit Hill Giant potions or gloves, starting stats or level 4 respec stats could be Strength at 16, Dex at 12, Constitution at 14, Intelligence at 8, Wisdom at 16, and Charisma at 8. You could swap Wisdom for Dex in this case, but I like it this way, and for the 2 ability improvements, you would raise Strength to 18 and Wisdom or Dex to 18, and use the Potion of Everlasting Vigor in Act 2 to boost Strength to 20. This one, while being more honest, is a bit more odd and for more experienced monk players or multi-classers, so I'd just go with the first option, then decide at level 4 if you want to use Tavern Brawler and or potions. Real quick, make sure to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the video. Thank you for watching. Now back to the video. Circle of the Moon Druid. Druids are heavily underrated in my opinion, and there's going to be people that dislike this entry, but Druids really are some of the most powerful builds in the game to take purely to 12, and even more so if you're soloing the game. Honestly, any of the subclasses are good to take to 12, and each have their own reasons for doing so, but today we'll be talking about the Circle of the Moon, which is arguably the strongest mono-class Druid. Druids are extremely versatile, super fun to play, and of course can be overpowered. Druids are unique in that they have access to spells that most other casters don't. Like with the Wizard, we'd be here all day if I tried to explain all of them, so I'll just mention a few and give my favorites at each level like before. The first thing you think of when you think about a Druid is most likely wild shaping or shapeshifting into an animal, and the Circle of the Moon is the subclass that can make the most of this mechanic. All Druids can transform into badgers, cats, spiders, and wolves at level 2, and they all have their uses, but for now we must focus on the unique unlocks of the Moon Druid. Make sure to check out my previous video, Top 5 Most Underrated Builds, for a little more info on Druids overall. At level 2, the Moon Druid immediately becomes one of the best tank builds in the game, and probably the best tank in the early levels, being able to wild shape into the bear, which has a huge amount of starting HP and can goad enemies, which essentially taunts them and makes them attack you as the tank rather than your squishy companions. When you're in this form, note that your strength, dexterity, and constitution do not carry over from your human form, but intelligence, wisdom, and charisma do. Sometimes you'll want to maintain concentration on a spell while in bear form, so keep on the lookout for gear that buffs constitution saving throws. Someone might have to correct me on that because some of the gear doesn't work when you wild shape, but some effects do still stay. I'm not quite sure the particulars on which specific items those are. Also, there's always the transmutation stone from the wizard as well to help out, but none of this is extremely necessary. The bear form with its health and goad ability are pretty much all you'll ever need as a tank, though there is some nuance, and there's also the owlbear form, which we'll discuss momentarily. Still at level 2, the Moon Druid also gains the ability to wild shape using a bonus action, something the other subclasses are not able to do. The Moon Druid also gains Lunar Mend, which is a self-heal that uses a bonus action and spell slot and can be used while wild shaped. Also remember that you can use good berries as well while wild shaped to regain a little bit of health. At level 4, your animal forms will deal more damage, all Druids gain the Deep Wrath wild shape, and the Moon Druid gains the Dire Raven wild shape. This form can blind enemies, but the real use for this comes from being able to fly at level 4, which is something other classes can't do until at least level 5 aside from the Storm Sorcerer. Flight can be an invaluable resource at times, and can even save your honor run if playing solo. At level 5, you can now extra attack while wild shaped. At level 6, all Druids can now transform into a panther, or the absolutely goated, ridiculously overpowered owlbear. While every Druid gets the owlbear form, but as you've seen and will see, there are of course several reasons to choose the Moon Druid over the other two, especially if you want a monoclass and make the most of the owlbear form and the other wild shapes. If you're particularly interested in a stupidly powerful build, do a split of Moon Druid and Monk, and use Step of the Wind just before transforming into an Owlbear for battle. You can thank me later. The Owlbear is just absurd. It's got huge health and AoE attack, can rage, make enemies fearful, and can be exploited for its jump attack, which does a huge amount of base damage due to the weight of the form itself. There are many a player who have completely broken the game with this mechanic. Needless to say, the Owlbear form from here on out will most likely be your main form, at least for tanking. Also, at level 6, the Moon Druid gets Primal Strike, which simply causes your wild shape attacks to count as magical for the purpose of overcoming resistance or immunity to physical damage, basically ensuring you can do damage to anybody like the Monk from earlier. At level 8, your wild shape damage increases yet again, and the Moon Druid can transform into the Saber-Toothed Tiger, which is a form that doesn't get talked about much, but is a pretty cool form nonetheless, focusing on DPS. It can bite as a normal attack, but can also lunge, which deals big damage to prone enemies. It can shred armor to reduce a target's AC by 2, and the jump of this form is also enhanced for more range. When below 60 HP, it automatically regenerates health each turn and gains bonus movement speed. Something fun to play around with. At level 10, you gain a massive buff as the Moon Druid. First, all druids can transform into the dinosaur, which is pretty badass, and when wild shaped, you can make 2 extra attacks for a total of 3 attacks per turn, similar to the fighter class. What really makes the Moon Druid stand out here is the ability to now be able to transform into one of 4 elementals, the air, earth, fire, and water myrmidons, all complete with their own special abilities and attacks. These forms are extremely powerful, and combining these with the fact that any druid can create an army and summon extra elementals, the Moon Druid at this point is an actual force of nature. The myrmidon forms can teleport, go invisible, create tornadoes, and a whole bunch of stuff that just makes them so strong and easy to use. If you've never tried these before or played a high-level druid, I strongly encourage you to try it out. Taking the druid further to 12 will give you access to level 6 spells and increases your wild shape damage yet again. I haven't even gone into the spell list or anything else, but you can probably see why the Druid, and the Moon Druid specifically, is easily one of the best subclasses to take to 12. This is one of the safest ways to play and complete Honor Mode, especially if attempting a solo run. You can even put points into Charisma for dialogues, since you don't really need to worry about the first 3 stats. Same goes for Intelligence for some RP checks throughout the game. Definitely one of the strongest builds, and one of the most fun to play outside of combat. I'm going to quickly list my favorite spells and cantrips, mainly just for this build, and then I'll go over a quick outline to build the Moon Druid. My favorite cantrips are of course Shillelagh, Thorn Whip, and Produce Flame. Poison Spray is also a guilty pleasure of mine, and Guidance should always be taken when possible on at least one character in the party, regardless of circumstance. My favorite level 1 spells are Goodberry, Long Strider, and Enhance Leap. My favorite level 2 spells are Bark Skin especially, Enhance Ability, and Spike Growth just cause it's too good. If you ever plan on being in normal form, Hold Person and Moonbeam should be taken as well. Heat Metal is also really cool since only druids get it. Bards don't count. My favorite level 3 spells are Call Lightning and Plant Growth. My favorite level 4 spells are Blight, Confusion, Conjure Minor Elemental and Conjure Woodland Being, Dominate Beast, and Stone Skin. All of them except for Grasping Vine are good, to be honest. As far as level 5 and 6 spells go, just make sure to get Conjure Elemental and Hero's Feast. The rest are up to you. Now for the build, Strength, Dex, and Con are inconsequential unless forced into your normal form. You can really take any spread here based on what you yourself want to do in the run. So with that being said, Strength at 8, Dex at 14, Constitution at 16, Intelligence at 10, Wisdom at 16, and Charisma at 12. For the feats, boost your Wisdom to 20 with 2 ability improvements, and get Tavern Brawler as it will buff your wild shape damage. You can probably go ahead and get Tavern Brawler at level 4 as your first feat, then worry about Wisdom later. If you feel weird having 8 Strength, just carry the Club of Hill Giant Strength once obtained. It also pairs quite nicely with Shillelagh if needed. Hunter Ranger. The Ranger is widely known for being one of those classes that always gets multi-classed, and a lot of people seem to think monoclass Rangers are weak, which actually isn't the case. I won't say it's the strongest build in the game, but the Hunter Ranger is definitely one of the best monoclass builds you can try out. Rangers have several unique unlocks at level 1, from gaining fire, cold, or poison resistance, to summoning familiars and wearing heavy armor, or casting Sacred Flame. At level 2, they can choose from 4 different fighting styles, the best in the Ranger's case almost always being the archery fighting style, which gives a flat +2 bonus to attack rolls with ranged weapons. This may not look it, but this is a massive buff right at the beginning of the game. You could also choose defense, dueling, or 2-weapon fighting, which would be my second choice. At level 3, you become the Hunter, and can choose from one of 3 abilities: Colossus Slayer, Giant Killer, or Horde Breaker. We won't be taking Giant Killer as that's a bit too situational and is for a melee character, which leaves the choices of Colossus Slayer or Horde Breaker. Simply put, Colossus Slayer adds 1d8 bonus damage to your attack once per turn if the target is below its max health. Again, this doesn't seem like much, but it does add up over time, especially against bosses. It's also way more consistent than our other option. Now, Horde Breaker is our other choice and is the cooler option in my opinion, but it may not be as consistent. This essentially gives you a free extra attack on an enemy adjacent to an enemy you just attacked. So you got 2 dudes standing next to each other attacking your tank. You can use Horde Breaker to hit both of them using only 1 action point once per turn. This can be done with melee or ranged weapons, and is really extremely powerful if you can make good use of it. It also just always feels badass to attack multiple times. It does, however, become obsolete in the case of the Hunter subclass, which we will talk about in just a few moments. For this build, if you want to use Horde Breaker, I would use it up until level 11 and then respec for Colossus Slayer, but we'll come back to this shortly. At level 7, the Hunter can choose from one of 3 defensive tactics. Escape the Horde causes opportunity attacks against you to have disadvantage, which is decent for an archer. Steel Will gives you advantage against being frightened, and multi-attack defense gives enemies a -4 penalty to attack rolls against you until their next turn after attacking you once, essentially making it so their extra attacks have a smaller likelihood of hitting you. For this build, we don't need Escape the Horde really. We don't usually need Steel Will as there are other ways to prevent frightened, so multi-attack defense will be our best bet and will be utilized the most. At level 8, all Rangers no longer are slowed by difficult terrain, and plant-based surfaces can't harm them. At level 10, they also gain Hide in Plain Sight. Now, level 11 is the biggest reason for taking the Hunter Ranger as a monoclass build. Here, you unlock the absolutely devastating Volley and Whirlwind attacks, both of which are extremely overpowered. So much so that they alone can cause people to take Hunter to at least 11. Whirlwind attack is an AoE melee attack that strikes every nearby enemy in a 2-meter radius and makes separate attack rolls for each. Volley is essentially the same, but is a ranged attack firing a volley of arrows that hits every enemy in a 3-meter radius. Because of their nature, Horde Breaker doesn't work with these abilities, and so becomes obsolete at this level. This is why it's now better to respec and switch to Colossus Slayer. If you've never used these abilities, I strongly recommend you load up a high level character, respec it, and try it out. If not, just play from the beginning and have a blast with Horde Breaker first, then you'll really see how crazy these attacks are in comparison. My favorite level 1 spells for this build are Enhanced Leap, Long Strider, Ensnaring Strike, Hail of Thorns, and of course Hunter's Mark. Level 2 spells are Spike Growth and Silence, and level 3 spells are Plant Growth, Conjure Barrage, and Lightning Arrow. For a quick build, Strength at 12, Dex at 16, Constitution at 16, Intelligence at 8, Wisdom at 14, and Charisma at 8. You could swap Constitution and Wisdom stats if you like. Gear that reduces crit number needed works super well with archers, so look out for those gear pieces and Elixirs of Viciousness as well, which also have the same effect. Choose anything for your favorite enemies and natural explorers, but I do recommend at least getting Wasteland Wanderer Fire for fire resistance, defense, as it's the most common element in the game. Archery for fighting style, Horde Breaker for Hunter's Prey, Respect at level 11 to switch to Colossus Slayer. And for the feats, boost your dex to 20 with ability improvements, and take Sharpshooter for more damage and no more low ground penalties. Stay tuned for part 2, make sure to like and subscribe, thank you all for watching, and until next time, Purge evil.
Yeah, crown in my palm, but I ain't put it on. Yeah, crown in my palm, but I ain't put it on. Yeah, crown in my palm, but I ain't put it on. Yeah, crown in my palm, but I ain't put it on. Yeah.